It was all done in a hurry. Indeed. My employers had just acquired a much smaller concern that had recently gone bankrupt. I think the company probably got everything on the cheap from the administrators. Whilst my employer had been very successful and completely swamped with work in recent months, our management team were in a bit of a panic trying to get their new acquisition up and running. So we were sent there to redeploy staff and oversee the installation of our company's systems. To make a long story short, chaos reigned for several weeks. There was virtually no time for planning, everything was done on the fly, right down to replacing the new owner's computer network, which was not extensive enough, and adding all the necessary wiring. To make a long story short, the 10 of us scurried around the city like blue flies after lunch and literally gathered in the bar of our hotel to plan what was going to happen the next day. None of us lived more than an hour away by train, but we all often stayed in town for these much-needed evening meetings. One or two team members managed to escape home to see their wives and families, but the choice of those who could afford it depended on what was happening that day and the next morning. Anyway, feeling pretty tired, I had already been sitting at the hotel bar for about half an hour, waiting for the rest of the team to show up when Sherry walked into the lobby. Sherry was one of the computer nerds hired by a specialized company to install computer systems and train staff on how to use them. She took me by surprise when I realized exactly who had entered the bar. Sherry definitely didn't look like the nerdy girl I knew well, the one who spent all day teaching new employees how to use our company's systems. Gone were the baggy jumper, knee-length skirt, and glasses, replaced by a teasingly short skirt and a teasingly well-fitting silk blouse. She didn't look around and survey the establishment as one might expect. Sherry simply settled on a bar stool and ordered a drink. I figured she was waiting for someone, perhaps wondering which of my married colleagues was going on the road. Okay, I'll admit it. I got up from the table like a dud and very quickly sank down on the stool next to Sherry. Hey, beautiful. What's a pretty girl like you doing in a backwater like this? I asked. Sherry turned and looked in my direction, clearly intending to throw me an angry look and perhaps tell me where I could get off, but then she recognized me. Oh God, Steve, stop fooling around. What are you doing here? She grinned. I'm staying here, Sherry, I said, gesturing for the bartender to put her drink on my tab. Hey, I asked you first anyway. I'm meeting John, one of those electrician guys, for dinner. He lives in town and will pick me up from here. I thought you computer guys were all staying in Canote. Yeah, but John doesn't need to know about that, does he? She winked at me. Besides, the fewer people who know I'm dating, the better. I don't date colleagues from my company. It leads to too many complications. Ah, does that explain why you hide your light in the office? I don't know how I'll feel about it. I guess I'll take it as a compliment. It sure is, Sherry. Now that you're sitting here, I can see what you look like and how skillfully you disguise yourself. Boy, you're good at disguising yourself, girl. Poor John's going to get the shock of a lifetime when he gets here. She grinned. Most of the people I teach to run our systems are men, Steve. Let's just say they take instructions much better when they're looking at a monitor, rather than trying to peek at my divine riches. Now you know the secret to my success in business, Steve. Yeah? It felt pretty damn good when I realized it was you sitting there. Men, don't give me that Steve stuff. I bet you were watching my every move, and that it took you longer to raise your gaze to my face. Yes, I admit it. And who can blame me for that? Sherry, you are a fine example of your sex. It's a shame you don't date your coworkers. I smirked at her. Steve, you've always been a charmer, even for that weirdo in the office. But remember, you don't work for the same employer as me, so technically we're not colleagues. What a charming idea, Sherry. But there's one catch. I'm married. Damn, just when I thought I'd get lucky, she grinned. But if you ever get bored with married life, you know my company's phone number. We joked in the same vein for another 20 minutes until eventually Sherry's date showed up, and when he recovered from his shock, they left together. I bought myself another drink and went back to my table in the corner to wait for my colleagues. I don't know. It must have been about 10 or 20 minutes later that I went out to the loo. While I was in there, another guy came in and started using the urinal next to mine. Pretty girl, he commented. Excuse me? Said I, not sure I'd heard him correctly. It's always a bit jarring when a complete stranger strikes up a conversation with you in the gents. You never know what their motives are. But I tried to remain polite. That girl you were talking to at the bar is very pretty, the man clarified. Yes, very, isn't she? Are you in town on business? He asked, as I started to wash my hands. Yes, we're opening a new branch in town. Married? Yes, but why do you ask? Oh, I was just thinking. Married men away from home have to watch who's watching them when they're talking to pretty girls in hotel bars. By then, the guy was washing his hands and I was drying mine under the fan. I was chronically confused by him. I was trying to figure out if he was a weirdo trying to pick me up or an unlikely pimp looking for business for his girls. Are you implying something? Yes. You've been at the bar 3 nights this week, and whenever you're there, so is that little shit in the other corner. Haven't you noticed him? No. I really don't understand what you're saying. As soon as you spoke to that girl, he started fiddling with his phone. What's more, when you go up to your room in the evening, he goes out into the lobby and stays there until midnight. By then, we had left the gentleman's, and the guy told me he couldn't say anything more because he thought the thug hiding in the corner might have spotted him. He asked for my mobile phone number and said he would call me in a few minutes, and then walked out the front door of the hotel. Confused, I returned to my seat at the bar, still trying to figure out why I had given a complete stranger my mobile phone number. True to my word, a few minutes later my phone rang. It was the same guy, and he asked me to just sit quietly and listen, and then told me an almost unbelievable story. He went door to door for quite a while, but the gist of his story was that he had recently been stitched up by his ex-wife. According to him, while on a business trip, he innocently struck up a conversation with a pretty young woman sitting at the hotel bar. The conversation revealed that she had come to the bar to hide from her abusive ex-husband, whom she had managed to track down on the street before he could spot her. It hadn't occurred to my gullible new acquaintance that sitting on a stool in a bar wasn't the best place for her to hide. If he hadn't been so fascinated by her attractive looks and history, he might have realized that the best place for her was a dark corner. But she pointed out the marks on her face and hands that made him assume someone had recently abused her, and he swallowed her story like a hook, line, and bloody sinker. Then she suddenly announced that her husband was about to enter the bar and fled through a door at the back of the room. Fearing for her safety, my new friend followed her and quickly discovered that she was trying to hide in an alcove in the corridor. He offered to get her a room for the night where she could hide, but she insisted she couldn't go out into the hotel lobby because her ex-husband would be sure to see her. Yes, even I guessed what would happen next. After much discussion, it was decided that the girl would take the key from him and hide in his room while my new friend booked herself a room. He would then give her the key and she could hide there for the night. That's exactly what happened. As soon as he gave the girl the key, she hugged him and kissed him on the cheek in gratitude, after which he escorted her to her room and went straight back to his room. The next morning, he did not see the girl and treated the incident as a slightly costly delusion of old-fashioned chivalry. Feeling calm and pleased with himself, he thought the incident was over, but it was not. A few days later, unpacking his suitcase, his wife discovered a pair of women's underwear at the bottom of it. And then all hell broke loose. A few more days later, he was served with divorce papers, and in them he discovered that a certain young woman had admitted to having sexual relations with him in the hotel room that night. What's more, there were pictures of him with this young woman at the bar, as well as entering and/or leaving the room. He claimed that the whole pantomime was set up by his wife and her lover, who he later learned was her boss at the place where she worked before the children came along. While he had no proof of that fact, neither did he have proof that his wife had an intimate relationship with this guy until their divorce was finalized and they were officially separated. The bastard was at her house when the judge ordered the separation, and I was banned from going near the house because the cow claimed I threatened her with violence. Now she has a house because I have to provide accommodation for the children until they come of age. I have the burden of child support, and the damn house. And all the while, that jerk is sleeping there with my ex-wife. I understand your obvious frustration, my friend, but what does this have to do with me? I asked when he finally stopped talking. Are you sitting at the corner table that you and your mates have been using all week? He asked. Yes. Then try not to be too conspicuous, but there should be a young chap sitting alone in the corner by the opposite wall. I suppose he's almost hidden from you behind that damn triffid plant. I casually glanced in the direction my new friend was pointing. Sure enough, there was someone behind the plant, but I couldn't make out exactly who. Yeah, I think I see him. Well, I don't know what his game is, but that little bugger is watching you, my friend. I'm just nodding at you because you seem like a pretty decent bloke, and I wouldn't want you to get stitches like I did. You are very kind, my friend. But I have no intention of straying from the righteous path. Neither do I, my friend. And in fact, I did not intend to. But that hasn't stopped me from committing adultery. Your wife, for some reason, thinks you commit adultery when you are outside the house. Never. I very seldom leave the house at all. This is my first trip in over a year, I informed him. Pretty weird, don't you think? Why else would this guy be following you? Are you following me? Yes, of course. He's been following you in the hotel for the last 3 nights. Nonsense, my friend. It must be pure coincidence that we both arrive at the hotel at about the same time every night. He doesn't stay at the hotel. He goes home just after 1 o'clock in the morning. Look, I can prove it to you. Finish your drink and leave the hotel. Walk to the Plume of Feathers, it's only a couple of 100 yards or so. There are lots of entrances there, so if he's following you, as I assume he is, he'll have to follow you inside the pub to make sure you don't slip out of one of them. If you stand at the bar itself, you can watch his entrance in the mirror behind it. As I left the hotel, I walked past the other guys and told them I'd be right back. Only halfway to Plume of Feathers did I wonder if I was doing the right thing. After all, there was a distinct possibility that I was setting myself up for a mugging or something. There were very few people around. I got safely to the Plume and ordered a pint of beer. Sure enough, the young thug I cast a quick glance at as I left the hotel bar came in and bought himself a drink at the far end of the bar. He then took a seat at the far end of the room from where he could watch me. A few minutes later, my mobile phone rang again. Was I right or not? Yes, I agreed. He's standing against the wall and trying to pretend he's not watching me. What are you going to do with him? Hell knows. Well, just don't do anything stupid, like let him know you spotted him, or chat to any of the backups. Let me think about it and I'll call you tomorrow. But what if he's, plans to rob me or something? No, he's not like that. I'm guessing he's a college student moonlighting at some dodgy private detective agency. He certainly has no idea how to secretly spy on someone. I've never noticed him. You, my friend, are too much like me. The thought of going astray doesn't cross your mind, and so you have no reason to be constantly looking over your shoulder. Your ginger mate, on the other hand, is alert and constantly scanning his surroundings. I'm a little surprised he hasn't noticed your shadow. Yes, the red-haired colleague he was referring to is in fact the office Casanova, and he was the one I first suspected Sherry had come to the hotel to meet. After finishing my pint of beer at the Plume, I headed back to the hotel via the somewhat winding route that led along the river. I hoped I looked like I was out for an evening walk to get some fresh air. Back at the hotel, the guys were curious as to where I disappeared to, but didn't question me. We then got busy making plans for the office and discussing what we hoped we could get done the next day. Later, as I was leaving the bar and heading to my room, I noticed with the corner of my eye that someone was hiding behind that damn plant again. Are you okay? My new friend asked, calling me the next day. Yeah, I'm fine, but I still can't figure out why that guy is following me. Do you want to find out? Yeah, I guess so. Someone has to pay the bastard, and if my wife is spending my hard-earned money, I'm going to be really annoyed. Okay, leave it to me. There are several other divorced husbands working in the office I've been assigned to. I'll have to stay out of sight because the creep might recognize me, but we think we have a fail-safe plan to grab the creep and ask him what he's doing without letting on that you know he's watching you. That would be rather difficult, wouldn't it? No, the guys would trick him into thinking they were hired to watch you too, and pounce on him. Hell, he's just a kid. He'll probably wet his trousers. Either way, they'll promise him that if he confesses to them, they won't let whoever hired him know that he failed. With any luck, he'll keep his mouth shut rather than risk losing his earnings. It was decided that I would set off again for Constitution at about the same time as the previous evening. Only this time the way to the river lay by a very unusual route which led me into a dark alley. I confess that as I entered this alley, I wondered again if I had gotten myself into something unpleasant. Halfway down the alley, I noticed 2 dark figures lurking in the shadows. With some relief, I heard one of them say, "Keep walking, he's 50 yards behind you." I continued my walk, and nothing more remarkable happened to my knowledge. And when I returned to my room in the evening, there was someone behind the plant again. Well, it worked, but it doesn't make much sense, said the voice of my new friend when I answered my mobile phone just after midnight. Is that what he said? Yes, that's right. They couldn't stop him from talking. Well, they seemed like big blokes to me. Everyone looks big in a dark alley at this time of night, my friend. But you just wouldn't believe it. I know I've lost my mind. Your little ponytail should pick you up from the office every night. He should follow you until midnight. And then when he's sure you've gone to bed, he can run home. That's it? Yes, he's moonlighting for the local detective agency, as we suspected. But they're not really interested in what you do or where you go, unless it's to the railway station. The railway station? Yes, you know those things run on rails. Well, yes, that's how I got here. There was no point in going by car. The interesting thing is that if you get to the station, he'll keep an eye on which train you get on. If it's a northbound train, he might drop you off and go home. If, on the other hand, you get on a southbound train, well, then he has a mobile phone number to call right away. A southbound train, you say? Yes, I presume you live on the south coast, my friend. Yes. But why do you want to take the northbound train? My sister lives half an hour from here. I guess that's bad news, isn't it? Yeah, do you have a number to call this guy? I'll send you a text as soon as we're done talking. Thanks. What are you going to do, my friend? I think I'm going to visit my sister tomorrow night. Do you need any encouragement? That would be nice of you. I have no idea what I'm about to get myself into. Text me the time of the train you're traveling on tomorrow, and we'll meet at the next station. Also, if you see two of my friends, don't pay any attention to them, if you understand me. They are complete strangers to you, and it will be safer for everybody if it stays that way. Is that really necessary? They are two very angry ex-husbands, my friend. All you have to do is nod to them, and they'll be happy to take care of anything you need once we're on the train and back here. Excuse me? There are CCTV cameras in all the stations now, my friend. It's almost undeniable when an alibi is required. I didn't recognize the phone number my tail was supposed to call. It was a mobile phone number, so even if I had tried to trace it, it would have gone nowhere. The next evening, after traveling one station northbound, I transferred to a southbound train, and my new acquaintance was at a station down the line from where I had started my journey. He reported that a young man had watched the departure of my northbound train and then left the station, presumably to go to bed early. I saw no sign of the two large dark figures I had passed in the alley the previous evening, nor had my new friend mentioned them. We discussed, of course, what I might discover when I got home, and what we would do if no one was home. My wife didn't say she was going out, and we decided that she was expecting guests at home. However, there was always the chance that I would call and have a chat with her in the evening. I had already done that once that week, and come to think of it, my wife seemed a little distracted. She admitted to me that she was in the middle of a TV program, had switched off the sound when the phone rang, and was trying to follow the program through the subtitles. Constance always followed those stupid soap programs on TV, so I accepted her explanation. By then, I wasn't so sure anymore. In fact, I was racking my brains trying to remember what else I heard in the background during the conversation. Some half-heard sound kept me on my toes, and a couple of times I thought that maybe Constance had covered the microphone with her hand. She also giggled at one point in our conversation, but I figured she was laughing at something in her soap. I looked around, but it was just the two of us getting off the train at my home station. My new friend must have noticed this. Don't worry, they're already here. They came by car earlier. As we walked towards my house, my companion started talking to himself. For a few seconds, I thought he had lost his mind. But then I realized he had one of those blue teeth in his ear. Apparently, he was talking to two dark shadows. He informed me that we had better stop somewhere for a while. Constance was still alone, but she was waiting for someone. When I asked him why he was so sure, he told me that 5 minutes ago she had opened the door of the integral garage and rolled our car out into the street. Looks like her guest intends to stay all night, he commented. We spent some time looking in shop windows in that area of town where we couldn't be seen from the road until my companion announced that the game was on. We then headed towards my house. My companion didn't let me barge in there like the proverbial bull in a china shop. He pointed out that tonight was probably not the first night Constance had visitors, so there was no point in closing the stable door after the horse had galloped away. We should give them enough time to get a proper handle on what they're about to get into. That way, we can get the evidence I'll need when the case goes to trial. My companion was evidently more experienced than I in such matters, so I took his advice. We lingered in the garden for about 20 minutes until my impatience got the better of me. Then I crept to the window of the back parlor. Fortunately, the curtains, which Constance was pleased to discover, had shrunk a little when she had washed them. I didn't have time to pull the steps apart again and correct the frilly cord so that they closed completely in the middle. I never thought Constance was capable of such a thing. He was one of our local councilors, no less, and a potential parliamentary candidate for his party at the next general election. Our current MP has already announced that he intends to resign. It is quite clear that Constance was doing what a certain former US president called "do not engage in sexual relations." I was somewhat inconsistent on this point. I only found out that the bastard's name was Tony Copeland, because Constance was handing out circulars to his political party before the last local elections. Constance was not an ardent supporter of that party, but inexplicably found herself involved in the last local election campaign. I have wondered ever since whether Constance's affair with Copeland was the result of her involvement with the party during that election, or whether her sudden interest in local politics and elections was the result of her and Copeland's affair. I must admit that I will probably never know the answer to that question. I suppose I was still pondering the question when my companion pulled me away from the window. The last thing I had time to see was Constance's head rising and falling. As we moved away from the house, my companion handed me a small video camera with a strap around my neck. He explained that once we were inside the house, I should keep the camera pointed at Copeland and Constance for as long as possible. But if Copeland tries to attack me, I should just let go of the camera and defend myself. He reminded me that the camera will continue to record even if it's just hanging on a lanyard. And no matter what I said or did while we were in the house, I was in no way to threaten physical violence to any of the perpetrators. If he attacks you, smash his head in, I don't care, but don't raise your hand to him first. I will keep this camera on you at all times to prove that you did not attack him, and I will try to keep the camera on both of them at all times. 2 cameras? I asked. Yes, that's my business, selling video cameras in bulk. Didn't I tell you? You haven't told me anything about yourself. I don't even know your name. That's better if you decide later that you want the business to be run by boys. After sneaking into the garage and quietly deflating all of Copeland's car tires, we went through the fire door into the kitchen. From there, we could see and record what was going on in the living room, where Copeland had by then returned the favor to Constance. It took all my self-control and the influence of my companion not to rush into the room and use my right boot to make Copeland sing alto from that day forward, or perhaps castrato. Be that as it may, my obliging friend convinced me that neither my right shoe nor a carving knife from the kitchen shelf would be conducive to my long-term well-being. In his view, HMG long-term care homes are places you visit, not facilities you'd like to spend 10 or 15 years imprisoned in. How the hell Constance didn't notice us standing there recording the scene, I just don't understand. Then, Copeland apparently got tired of his labors and climbed on top of Constance, although she objected, saying he hadn't gotten off her yet. Personally, upon reflection, I decided that was pretty damn unsportsmanlike of him. Copeland told Constance that he couldn't hold back any longer and started fighting her off as hard as he could. Oddly enough, Constance told him to calm down and sort of hinted that he had hurt her when he did that. Their conversation didn't make much sense because Copeland interspersed almost every word he said with 2 words, "Goddamn bitch." And Constance repeated, "Oh shit." In all the years I'd known her, I'd never once heard Constance use a swear word. Usually when we made love, she'd say, "Oh God." I always took that as a compliment, but perhaps I was wrong. Copeland had been at it for a few minutes when the mobile phone on the coffee table rang. Copeland put the receiver to his ear and said, "Hello?" Things started to look comical from there. Of course, I could only hear one side of the conversation. What the caller was saying to him, I have no idea, but I think I got the gist of it. "How did you get this number?" Copeland demanded. "No, I don't have anything I want to report to any newspaper." "How dare you, young man?" "If you make accusations like that in your newspaper, young man, I'll get you a bloody job." Constance stopped her movements and looked at Copeland. She must have sensed something in his tone. "Now look at this. I'm visiting a local resident on official council business. It's my duty as a counselor to help. That's none of your business, young man. Her husband knows perfectly well that I'm here today." At this point in Copeland's telephone conversation, Constance's gaze suddenly returned to the mirror on the wall and a look of horror appeared on her face. "Steve, Oh God, no. Steve! She screamed at the top of her voice. Constance's sudden scream caught Copeland off guard, and he looked up at her. I can only assume he realized she was looking at something reflected in the mirror because he shifted his upper body to one side so he could see me and my companion. There have not been many occasions in my life when I have seen real fear in someone's eyes. But that night, I saw fear in Copeland's eyes. You know, I don't know if he turned off his mobile phone or not, but I do know that in a panic, he pushed Constance away from him with such force that she fell to the floor, hit her head on the coffee table, and briefly lost consciousness. I must say, I've never seen anyone change into parade uniform so quickly. Copeland then found his jacket and threw it on. My companion dragged me further into the living room as we continued to film Copeland hurrying to leave the house. I later realized that my companion had led us out of the kitchen doorway to make way for Copeland to make his way to the garage where his car was parked. Holding his shoes in one hand and his underwear in the other, Copeland rushed past us into the garage. Soon I heard him shout, "You bastards!" Meanwhile, my companion told me to check on Constance, but at the same time warned me to keep an eye on her while he kept an eye on Copeland. I gathered from Copeland's shouts that he had discovered that his car had 4 flat tires. Anyway, I heard the roller garage door open and he tried to drive away. By this time, I was next to Constance, who had just regained consciousness, sat up, looked me in the eye, and immediately passed out. In doing so, she once again banged her head unpleasantly against the floor. From my point of view, Constance didn't seem to be having the best evening. I decided that I had better get medical help for Constance, so without taking my eyes off Constance, I went to our landline and dialed 3 nines. I was answered that an ambulance and the police were on their way. Indeed, I heard the sirens even before I hung up. Oddly enough, I was still standing there filming a semi-conscious Constance when a paramedic burst into the corridor. "Time to leave, my friend." My companion returned and gently nudged me towards the door. He also put sunglasses on my nose and a huge trilby on my head, which he pulled tightly over the sunglasses. I have no idea where he got these things, and was somewhat surprised to see that he was now dressed the same way too. I realized why as we walked out of the house through the garage. A TV crew, local news I realized, and several reporters were waiting to pounce on us. They peppered us with unanswered questions as my companion led me to a waiting taxi. Some stranger stepped between the reporters, my companion, and me and repeated, "My client can't make any statements right now." As the taxi took us to the train station, I looked at my companion. "Is what you have told me complete rubbish?" I asked him. "No, my wife stitched me up as I promised, but her lawyer, well, he was an arsehole. You only met him today." "Copeland?" "Yes, Copeland. And last week, a mate of mine who does private investigations told me that a certain Tony Copeland contacted him and wants you followed. My mate didn't like the job. It didn't make sense to him. And Copeland wouldn't explain what it was about and he turned it down. But my friend, knowing of my hostility to Copeland, warned me of his desire to be kept in the loop if you showed the slightest inclination to come home. A sort of surprise. Well, it was quite obvious, wasn't it? It didn't take a genius to put 2 and 2 together to realize what Copeland's game was. Sorry about the press, but I wanted to make sure that Copeland's political aspirations were over. I hope it doesn't benefit his law business as well. Actually, once they get their claws into the bastard, I'm sure the press will quickly forget about you and your wife. There's plenty more juicy dirt in Copeland's past for them to sink their teeth into. We were traveling north on the train when my companion informed me that Constance was in the local hospital. A fracture of the scalp of her skull, his companion thought. He then asked me if I wanted something done to Copeland when the police were done with him. I looked at him with a question in my eyes, and he explained that Copeland had found that driving a car with 4 flat tires was not easy, and he had crashed into at least 3 parked cars and finally parked in a shop window. Copeland was last seen being taken away in the back of a police van. My interlocutor, who was apparently still on the phone and receiving reports from eyewitnesses at the scene, was short on words and could not give the exact reason for Copeland's arrest. He simply called it a traffic violation. It seemed reasonable to me at the time. Driving a car with 4 flat tires certainly cannot be legal. I later learned from television and newspaper reports that Copeland panicked when he saw the garage door lifted, and television and press people gathered outside. He stood undressed in the garage while my companion blocked Copeland's access to the switch that would close the door again. Then a panicked Copeland jumped into his car and drove off. Or, more correctly, attempted to drive away. The brief description I read in the press said that his car was certainly on the road, but hit the TV crew's van as it left my house and many other parked cars as it drove down our street. Then, when Copeland tried to turn onto the main road, he apparently collided with a passing lorry. Apparently, the collision with the large vehicle gave Copeland's car the momentum it needed to crash into the shop window. Too bad our taxi was traveling the other way that evening. I would have loved to see the carnage with my own eyes. As we drove along, my companion informed me that this evening would probably be our last meeting. But he also said that if all went according to plan, I would hear from him again in the future. He apologized again for the unfortunate publicity, but said he needed something spectacular to let the dogs off the chain. It was many months before I realized what he was talking about. I'll come back to it later. At one point, as our train was crossing a bridge over a river, my traveling companion threw the mobile phone he was using out of the window. He told me that I would no longer be able to contact him on that phone, nor would anyone else. Keep the video camera. I have plenty of others. He smirked. He smirked. What about the film in those two? I'm sure the chip in this camera is enough for what you need, Steve. I have plans to record in them, and I may have to interfere a little. But don't worry, your wife's face won't end up in the papers. Who cares about that? I said. I care, my friend, and I'm sorry it will happen. No man wants everyone to know that his wife was a whore who hung on to him for God knows how long. It's not good for our ego, my friend, I assure you. Such is human nature. My companion got off the train a couple of stops ahead of me. He shook my hand, apologized again for the publicity and any other repercussions I might accidentally face in the future. He assured me that he would do his best to minimize them, but didn't elaborate on exactly what he thought might happen. One last time, he handed me a business card and told me it was the business card of a lawyer I had at home. He was a good man and could be trusted. I was to use his services in my divorce, if I decided to go through with it, and in other contingencies. Then, the train left the station and I never met him in person again, but I was to hear from him and see his face again. But I will tell you about that a little later. The night man at the front desk caught me as I was entering the hotel and handed me a package marked urgent. I took it with me to the bar where, truth be told, I was going to eat my fill. Who could refuse under such circumstances? At the bar, I tore the paper out of the packet and discovered that it contained the packaging from the manufacturer of the small video camera I now had in my pocket and a printed note. Essentially, the note instructed me not to get drunk. I was to go to my room and make at least one copy of the camera's memory card file on my laptop, or better yet, several others on whatever media I had on hand. I also asked that I not keep the copies and the original in the same place. Sipping my whiskey and ordering a chaser, I did as the note said. I burned one copy of the file to a DVD disc, which I later removed and put in the hotel safe, and sent the other to my sister. I only managed to make 2 extra copies because I only carry a couple of blank DVDs and CDs in my laptop sleeve. It was probably only morbid curiosity that made me watch the pantomime one more time before I lay down and tried to fall asleep. In the end, I didn't succeed. God only knows how I looked the next day, but everyone in the office tried to stay away from me if they could help it. About mid-morning, 2 plainclothes policemen came into the office wanting to have a heart-to-heart talk with me. I took them to an empty office where we could have some privacy. They explained that they were having a disagreement over the fact that Constance, who claimed to remember nothing of the night before, had suffered a skull fracture, even though it was only a hairline fracture. I could tell from the way they talked that someone had decided, as if I had acted rather aggressively the last time they had seen Constance and me together. They didn't say exactly who had claimed that, of course, but it wasn't hard for me to guess. They refused to confirm or deny that it was Copeland. It took me a while to find the right moment in the recording, at which point I asked if they wanted a copy. They actually asked to take the original recording, but I told them I had no intention of letting the thing out of my possession. Eventually, they agreed to a copy, which I made while they waited, from a DVD that one of the computer guys had given me. Whilst my laptop burned the DVD, I asked one of the girls to get us some tea, and the officers and I struck up a friendly conversation about the previous few days. That's if you can have a friendly conversation with a police officer on duty at all. They showed a lot of interest in my mysterious friend, but I think it was just curiosity on their part. The video proved that he didn't hurt Constance. The cops actually wanted to know if Copeland could be charged because he pushed Constance away from him pretty hard. They said they would ask the CPS representatives to look into it. I think they were just interested in who had a grudge against Copeland and why. They said I should be on my guard and suggested that Copeland was a pretty powerful lawyer. At the same time, they sort of hinted that they had reason to suspect that Copeland wasn't exactly honest in all his dealings. Like sleeping with other people's wives, I remarked. Oh, and not only that, Steve, we just can't understand the scoundrel. Let's just say he's unofficially on a lot of cops' interest lists. But, if I may say so, you seem to be taking all this somewhat lightly, Steve. What else am I supposed to do, officer? Lose my temper and start beating my chest? If I behave the way you suggest, wouldn't you be leading me in handcuffs to your car right now? I asked. Yes, Steve, I think I would. The officer smiled back at me. I can tell you from experience that when the stew spills and everything turns to shit, it's best to laugh, or at least try to do so. It really helps those who wish you misfortune. Both officers laughed and shook my hand as they left. After lunch, I went in search of a working phone box and rang a solicitor a friend had recommended to me. He was expecting my call and simply asked if I was going to get a divorce right away. When I replied that I had no other option if I wanted to keep up appearances in the future, he simply said he would get down to business and then asked if he could send one of his staff to see me later that day. She would need to know all of Constance's details and my personal details. I asked him if I should give this woman a check to pay for his services, but he informed me that that was already taken care of. Don't ask Steve, but you will never get a bill for my services. A man we both know intends to pay for all of Copeland's expenses, and he is, as you know, from a very wealthy family. And he has made a good deal of money himself, only not all of it is strictly legal. In the evening, the whole crew waited for me at the bar, obviously hoping I had calmed down enough to tell them about the night before. By then, they had all read the day's papers. I thought it was funny that I hadn't seen a single abandoned newspaper in the office since the first morning call. I told them the short version. When I got home, I found Constance doing somersaults with Tony Copeland. They asked how it had all been covered in the press, but I denied everything I knew about how it had happened. It was the plain truth. I really didn't have the slightest idea about the whole thing. It was probably about 9 o'clock in the evening when my new lawyer, an extremely good-looking but also very capable assistant or assistants, came to the hotel to meet me. We walked to the hotel library to meet in private. The first thing Miss Clarkson told me, yes, that's what she was that she had already spoken to Constance and advised her to get a solicitor herself as soon as she was discharged from hospital. It will be much easier if the lawyer himself explains to him that he can't stand on his own 2 feet. Your wife doesn't want a divorce, do you know? Yes, I know. Please look at all these messages she sent me today, I replied, showing her my mobile phone. Has she tried to call you? Yes, but I'm very busy. I suspect that's what she and Copeland were counting on. Quite right. Copeland has been after her for some time now. She claims he's only been successful this week, but, well, in my experience, people tend to be stingy with the truth when it benefits them. It's unlikely he'd be following my movements unless he had reason to believe he'd get the opportunity to put Constance to bed. Screw it. I think that's the word you were looking for, Mr. Marshall. Steve, Miss Clarkson. Everyone knows me as Steve. Very well, Steve. But I'm afraid that to everyone but my fiancé, I am Miss Clarkson. I imagine a very handsome man. And a very stoic Steve, believe me. Oh, I do, Miss Clarkson, I do. She smiled at me for the first time, changing her businesslike expression, but then returned to the reason for her visit. Surprisingly, she already knew almost everything there was to know. Miss Clarkson pulled a piece of paper out of her briefcase and sketched out a list of questions. Constance and my full names, date of birth, our wedding, and so on. I watched as Miss Clarkson simply ticked off the correct answers she had already typed out. There were a couple of minor errors, but nothing more than that. Everything was in place, including the value of our house, but not the contents of our bank accounts or the details of our savings. Not that I could remember them in any detail myself. Miss Clarkson then placed a form in front of me which I was to sign. Essentially, it was a contract that asked her boss to act on my behalf in the affairs of Constance and my divorce and any other legal matters, whether they related to our divorce or not, until I canceled the contract in writing. Before leaving, Miss Clarkson suggested that I call Constance and speak to her. I actually made it verbally clear that I had no intention of forgiving Constance for what she had done. She also said that I could find Constance at her sister's house. Your house is being watched by the press. You might feel more comfortable if you found another place to sleep this weekend, Steve. Miss Clarkson had always been a little uncomfortable addressing me as Steve. By the way, your employer is doing a fine job and is rather vague about your whereabouts. I wondered who, and more importantly when, had asked them to do that. After Miss Clarkson had left and I had been secretly questioned about who my delightful visitor had been, I went up to my room to call Constance. The boys were a little shocked when I told them that Miss Clarkson was a representative of my solicitor. None of them could understand why she had come to see me at this hour, and they even wondered how much a lawyer would cost me. The call was answered by June, Constance's sister. Our conversation was short and concise. All June could say was that she was personally sorry for what had happened and hoped we could remain friends. She then went on to say that she would go and get that stupid cow. 4 words that I think expressed June's attitude to her sister's behavior. A year or so later, while on my honeymoon in Malta, by coincidence I ran into June again. But I'll talk about that too later. The press apparently only learnt of my whereabouts after I spent a weekend at the home of my sister and her family. My sister and her husband were sympathetic and didn't pry any details out of me. Heck, they'd probably read most of them in the papers anyway. Sunday night, when I got back to the hotel, I was handed a restraining order. I couldn't understand what it was about, but over the phone, Miss Clarkson explained that Copeland had obtained an emergency restraining order prohibiting me from releasing to the press or putting on the internet any of the material made that night. Come on. I couldn't make sense of all the legal nonsense they were spouting at the best of times, but at least Miss Clarkson got the point across to my thick skull. But I didn't do it, and I don't intend to, I replied. We know, but someone else did, and still intends to do their best to embarrass Copeland. Oops. Yes, and you can expect to be summoned before a high court judge tomorrow morning. But don't panic, we've got it all covered. Glad to hear you're not panicking. That's what you pay us for. What can a high court judge do by sending me to jail? Well, yes, but I told you we had it under control. On Monday afternoon, I found myself in the courtroom, and there was a very angry judge standing in front of me. I didn't utter a word. It was all my lawyers, several, dressed in wigs and gowns who spoke. I informed the judge that an anonymous third party was in possession of 2 recordings similar to the one I had and made at the same time. To my surprise, the police photo analyst confirmed that the photos in question were not stills from the recording I had made. Incidentally, we are talking about 2 photos that somehow made it into the hands of the national press. I believe that if Copeland had done nothing, only less reputable and sensationalist publications would have printed them. And in the end, they were printed, just like every other newspaper and media outlet that managed to get their hands on these bastards. Both photos showed Tony Copeland. In neither photo was Constance recognizable. The judge seemed to have a hard time believing that I had no idea who my mysterious companion was that night, and practically stated so. In the end, however, he seemed to agree with my reasoning, and he reminded me, actually informed me since I didn't understand the court order handed to me at the hotel, that there was a temporary moratorium on the release of all recordings made in the house that fateful evening. I was then told I was free to go. I had a hell of a hard time making my way through the crowd of reporters outside the courthouse. Copeland had managed to get an emergency injunction on the grounds that they were in a private home, and he argued that he had a reasonable expectation of privacy. At least that's what was said. The newspapers vigorously fought the publication ban, and I strongly suspect they were assisted by my lawyers. When the case went to a full trial a few days later, the judge quickly overturned the ban. The gist of the judge's decision was that the house belonged to me, not Copeland, and that he had no right to privacy within its walls, especially in one of the common rooms. And since the people making the notes were me and my guest, even if I didn't know the person from Adam, Copeland couldn't object to them being in the public domain in whole or in part. Well, I guess that's what the judge said. Most likely, the whole shenanigans only served to increase public interest in the story. Eventually, all the newspapers and television news programs ran with the headlines and featured these 2 photos and several others that appeared in the following days more often than I expected. When the court eventually acquitted them, the gruesome headlines and stories attached to these photos were, from my perspective, brilliant. One of them read, "Caught in the act." Another read, cowardly retreat, and the attached story explained how Copeland calmly dressed himself while his mistress lay unconscious on the floor beside him. However, it was obvious that whoever took the footage from the video and released it to the press was very careful in their actions. Constance's face was either cut out of the frame altogether or blurred. I think it's safe to say that after my antics with the High Court judge, things went back to normal. I worked in the new office for a second week and then returned home. However, I found that I could not stay in the house, so I temporarily checked into a small hotel close to work. In the meantime, I was contacted by Miss Clarkson and informed that she had been contacted by a solicitor working for Constance. From what Miss Clarkson had told me, I understood that Constance was being pursued by the press boys. They must have found out that she was staying at June's house. Anyway, Miss Clarkson informed me that Constance's solicitor had told her that his client didn't want a divorce. But if I insisted, Constance was willing to accept the terms I would offer. We told him your surname is not Hamilton. Miss Clarkson chuckled. Hamilton, I repeated, not sure what that meant. Bloody hell, Steve, get over it. What year is it? Trafalgar, Nelson, Lady Hamilton? Oh yeah, very funny. I lied. There was no way I could understand what Miss Clarkson was talking about. Anyway, Miss Clarkson told me that Constance was in a hurry to get it all over with. Perhaps she thought it would somehow lead to the press leaving her alone. But in fact, I think the press had turned its attention to other matters long before it came to our divorce. Although there was a small headline about it in the inside pages of our local press, I agreed that everything would be split in half, provided Constance was willing to admit that her infidelity was the sole cause of the breakdown of our marriage, and she would agree to be a witness in any further proceedings I might decide to take against Copeland. Somewhat surprisingly, Constance's lawyers asked me to agree to appear in court as a witness in the case she had brought against Copeland. This confused me until Miss Clarkson informed me that it was likely to be a personal injury claim, and that the video recording we had made, a copy of which had already been given to Constance's solicitor, would be sufficient for Copeland to enter into an out-of-court agreement. I guess he did because I never heard from him again. The house was sold very quickly as the market was very good at the time. Constance took the few things she needed, and I put everything else in storage until I found another house I liked. But I didn't have time to look. Living in a hotel might not be fun, but you get used to it. Less work, no cooking, and it was cheaper than paying a mortgage. I even had free parking right in the city center. Every now and then, some reporter would track me down, and I was even willing to talk to him. But they weren't interested in Constance and me. They all asked me what I really knew about my mysterious friend. I was afraid I couldn't tell them anything. But several people with whom I got on very well confided to me that they thought there was something in Copeland which was not yet known, and that they thought it must necessarily concern my mysterious friend, and I gave their calling cards to Miss Clarkson, although by then she claimed that she was not personally acquainted with the man either. That didn't quite fit with some of the remarks she had made to me earlier in the course of our acquaintance, but she used the words personal acquaintance. I don't know exactly. It may have been 2 or even 3 months since that fateful evening, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, I was sitting at my desk one day looking at my computer screen as usual, when my desk shook from someone sitting on it. I looked to my left and saw a pair of knees covered by a gray flannel. Looking even further to the left, I noticed that the flannel fabric extended almost all the way down to my Nike trainers. Looking up, I saw a sizeless blue jumper topped with a mop of blonde hair and a pair of huge black horn-rimmed glasses. "Hello, handsome boy. What's a nice gentleman like you doing in an establishment like this?" Sherry asked. "Hi, Sherry. Long time no see. What are you doing in these parts?" I replied. Sherry explained that our company had become one of her employer's largest clients, and she was assigned to visit us 1 day a month. Literally to walk around and talk to employees in different departments, just to see if there were any changes to the program that she could suggest to make their lives easier. "So what can I do for you?" "I'm fine with it as it is." "Yeah, you'd be the first to let them know if you weren't happy." "No, Steve. I'm here to collect a debt." I have no idea what expression appeared on my face, but it caused Sherry to giggle. "Hey, handsome, you owe me dinner." "Really?" "Yeah, that's right. You told me you couldn't take me out to dinner because you're a married man. And from what I've read in the papers, you're not married anymore." I'm married? Well, not in so many words, but the gist of what you said in the hotel bar that night was exactly that. Yeah? By this time, I was trying to keep a confused expression on my face. Come on, Steve. Will you stop fooling around? I can't remember what you said to me the other night. Steve. Okay, beautiful. I haven't been outside in weeks. This will do me good. Where do you want to go? Oh, nothing much. I have to catch the train home just after 9. What a disappointment. Dinner, I said to Steve. Behave yourself. Damn, why do you pretty boys always talk like that? I'll be in the waiting room. When you pass out, she smirked. Then she slid off my desk and left the room. As before, Sherry's transformation was remarkable. It was impossible not to notice her as I stepped out of the lift. I don't think any of the men passing through the waiting room while she waited for me could have failed to notice her and perhaps regretted not waiting. The two security guards she was talking to, both were in their late 50s or 60s, were clearly fascinated by Sherry. As I approached, she pulled away from them and took my hand. Where are we going? She asked. To the hotel first, I need to change. No time, handsome. We have less than 4 hours. My train leaves at 9. But, no buts, Steve. We have a lot to talk about. I agreed, and accompanied by one of the guards, who insisted on carrying Sherry's bag, we walked to my car. After stuffing my briefcase and Sherry's into the boot, I drove us to a public house outside of town where I knew food was served all day. We talked for a while and ate leisurely. Sherry wasn't so much demanding as inviting me to speak up and share my thoughts. I don't know what it was about Sherry, but I felt I could talk to her and instinctively knew that my words would not become public the next day. When I spoke, Sherry took me by surprise, going on the offensive and telling me why she had lured me out of the evening dinner. Steve, you gotta do something about yourself, my friend. All the female colleagues in the office say, you're not the fun-loving guy you used to be. Of course, they all admit they can't blame you for the circumstances. But frankly, they'd like to see some sign that the old Steve is still in you. I'm not with you, Sherry. No, I don't think you see that yourself. Steve, you've always been fun to work with. Even I realized that when we worked on the same projects. And even then, we never worked closely together. You do realize that for years now, all the women in your company have been taking their man problems to good old Steve in logistics and planning? And from what I hear, some of the blokes have been turning to you for advice about their wives and girlfriends, too. They? That's news to me. Anyway, even so, I no longer have what you'd call a good track record in marital relations, do I? Silly, Steve. Everyone came to you because you showed them how to laugh. Well, at least see the funny side and laugh at things. Apparently, you were an ace at advising girls on what to get their men for birthdays and Christmas. And you weren't shy about advising them to dump those with no hope of success and telling them how to dump them. Did you know, for example, that unofficially, the HR girls tell the new girls that if they have a problem with any of the office gigolos and don't want to make a formal complaint, they should find you and have a chat? That's news to me. But I can remember. Yes, I suspect you can. But Steve, everyone is afraid to say even 2 words to you now. They say you walk around the office like a bear with a sore head. They miss the old Steve, the one you could laugh and joke with. Look, we all realize you're upset, but living in this bloody hotel and not going anywhere, it's just not right. Not for you anyway. You need to get out of the house and, start dating again. There are plenty of eligible women at the office. Sherry, I think I understand what you're saying. But didn't you tell me that dating coworkers is bad news? Besides, we're going out tonight, aren't we? Yeah, we're having dinner, and I asked you out, remember? Yeah, but who's gonna end up paying? I smirked back at her. See? This is the same Steve that girls can't get away from at the office. The guy who sees the funny side in everything. Even if I'm about to order the most expensive dessert on the menu. Sherry smiled back at me. I understand your point, and I'll try to leave my personal problems at home from now on. Do something better, Steve. Get yourself a nice flat or something and go out in the evenings. Even risk asking out some of the eligible women in the office. Look, I avoid my colleagues at work because, well, sometimes I can look a little cheap when I dress up to go out and have fun. Some Romeos take it the wrong way and think I'm frivolous. I'm sure you know what I mean. And like I said, trying to teach the average man how to use a computer program when he looks at my cleavage is usually not very successful. I've seen that from my own experience. I, of course, challenged Sherry by saying that she would never look cheap, and we both smirked at each other. Then Sherry ordered herself a dessert. Not the most expensive one on the menu, by the way. Oddly enough, after that, we started talking about Sherry's life and aspirations. I learned that she is 22 years old. To be honest, I had always assumed she was around 19, which was a bit silly of me. I'd first met Sherry when we were opening an office in Wales, about 18 months before, and even then she knew her onions. For some reason, perhaps because of the way she dressed, I thought of her as a perpetual teenager. The first time I saw Sherry dressed for going out was the night I told you about, when she was meeting that young electrician in the hotel bar. I drove Sherry to the train station to catch her train, and she thanked me for a good dinner and a pleasant evening. Then, getting on her train, she said we should do it again sometime. I think I agreed with her. The next day at the office, I struggled to put a smile on my face when I remembered it. It must have worked. I noticed that after a day or so, people stopped leaving the tea room as soon as I crossed the threshold, and those who had avoided my desk since then no longer did so and often stopped to pass the time. On the same lunch break, I visited several estate agents and got a list of furnished flats for rent. I guess I was still a little shy about buying, and if independent flat life didn't work out, I could always go back to the hotel. I guess that was the thought that was going round and round in my head. That Thursday, I got a call from Miss Clarkson with an interesting question. How do you like 250,000, Steve? Those were the first words she said to me. I'm sorry, but I'm not with you, Miss Clarkson. Copeland is clearly not thrilled with everything the press says about him. The man has something to hide. Anyway, things have gone quiet in the press, and we thought it would be a good time to hint that an attachment alienation case might be in the offing. I suspect Constance's legal advisors have also threatened something, but I can't be sure. Anyway, Copeland's people came back with an offer of 50,000 for us to leave. We discussed that offer, and now it's up to 250. We might even be able to squeeze another 25 out of those creeps if we nail them to the wall. Go ahead, Miss Clarkson. Take every penny you can from that scoundrel, but preferably settle out of court. Constance is not my favorite person in the world just now, but if I disgrace her in court, it will not leave me indifferent. Very well, Steve. The press will probably find out about it anyway. But you know the form, an undisclosed amount. It's almost as good as if Copeland had confessed that he— Yes, I was going to use your description of him for a moment. Not a week later, Miss Clarkson informed me that I would be £300,000 richer as soon as I signed on the dotted line. I immediately went there and put my signature on it. While I was doing this, Miss Clarkson hinted that Constance might soon be buying herself a new house and that she would probably pay cash for it. Miss Clarkson still did not know on what basis Constance had stitched up Copeland, but she suspected it was probably a personal grudge. A week or so later, I moved into a perfectly acceptable flat. It was further away from my office, but it came with free parking, which was in great short supply in the area. It was a two-bedroom suite with a large living dining room and a surprisingly spacious, well-equipped kitchenette. The washer and dryer were in the bathroom, but the room was big enough that you hardly noticed them. I don't know if it was the money Copeland put in my bank accounts or the fact that I tried to follow Sherry's advice. But by the end of this month, I was feeling much better, and every once in a while I'd go for a drink after work with one of the guys. There were three of them sitting at my desk. A colleague who had been with the company not too long ago, maybe a month or so, and Bob, my boss. I was just showing them a spreadsheet I was working on when the computer screen went out. After a second or so, the dreaded blue screen appeared, but it was blank. Then words started appearing in the upper left corner, one character at a time. Hi, Steve. Guess who's buried here in the depths of hell and playing with the servers? Almost panicking, I quickly started typing. Sherry, I'm in the middle of something. I have people with me. Almost instantly, a message came through. Oops, sorry guys, official business. Honest. Steve, are we all set for today? I was surprised when my boss reached over and started typing. Hi, Sherry, this is Bob. Sure, Steve is taking you out for an evening stroll. That bastard doesn't get out much these days. A message came in reply. Thanks, Bob. Same place and time, Steve. And remember, my train leaves at 9. Then the screen went blank again, and then my spreadsheet reappeared. Sorry about that, I said to my boss. For what? He replied, and then added, Nice girl, that Sherry. Our new colleague sat there with a perplexed look on his face, but finally asked, "Who's Sherry?" "Someone a little closer to your age than mine," I told him. "Tell that to Steve." Bob said, "She's just right for you. Boy, you need someone to brighten up your life a little." "Bob, I'm 12 years older than her. So 12 years between friends? Jesus, mate, you're too fixated on numbers." After that, we went back to calculating on my spreadsheet, making small changes here and there and seeing how they would affect the bottom line. It was probably half an hour later when the spreadsheet disappeared again, and another message appeared. "Excuse me, Steve, do I need a chaperone for lunch today?" "He'll meet you in the reception area at 12. Bob typed the text. "Thanks, Bob." My spreadsheet went up again. "Am I coming?" I asked Bob, probably annoyed that he'd scheduled two face-to-face appointments on my behalf. "Of course you'll help." It was a request for help, and when have you ever turned down a lady? Whoever asked you, the old Steve would have said yes. Have I really changed that much? No more than would be expected under the circumstances, my friend. But lately we've been seeing the old Steve gradually coming back. Now let's get to the numbers. I quickly realized why Sherry had asked me to go to lunch with her. She had a colleague of hers with her, who I believe had ambitions of his own. He was certainly annoyed that I was interfering with his work during their lunch break. I'd say he was also disappointed to learn that Sherry and I were having dinner together in the evening, and therefore would not be traveling back with him on the same train. Sherry tried her best to stay on the opposite side of the table from her colleague. Frankly, it surprised me that he didn't know what he was talking about. But perhaps he was thinking too much about himself and his charms, as is typical of some young men. Later, I went down to the back room where the company's servers were located and had a few words with him when Sherry wasn't around. As I walked up to my floor, it dawned on me that it had been a long time since I'd had a conversation like that with any of the gigolos in the building. When I met her in the reception area, Sherry looked as ravishing as she usually did after work. That evening, another security guard took the honor of carrying her briefcase to my car. Sherry told me that her coworker at work that day was new to her company, but knew her from college. Or rather, was well aware of how Sherry looked in civilian clothes, as she liked to call them. She also thanked me for everything I had said to him during the day. In the evening, or rather Sherry, did a little shopping and then had a quick bite to eat at one of the fast food places. I was feeling pretty tired after walking through all those damn clothing shops as I put Sherry on her train that evening. Do women really need to try on every single thing they see? I guess I liked watching Sherry come out of the changing room and ask me how she looked in skirts that seemed to get shorter and shorter. You know, guys, there comes a point when you have to take the bull by the horns and say that a skirt borders on obscenity. And then what do? They buy it. You know, if I'd realized that a little earlier, I wouldn't have been so hungry when we finally walked into that fast food place. Over the next 6 months, my divorce became final, and I began to adjust to living on my own. I dated the guys from the office from time to time, but most of them were young and didn't mind hanging out. Don't think I wasn't looking, because I was. I just couldn't find anyone who was, well, interested in me. Our dates with Sherry became routine. Don't think there was anything romantic about them, because there wasn't. Sherry would tell me how her life was going and ask me what I did in my spare time. Often, she chided me for not asking this or that woman out when I mentioned them. Sherry seemed to believe that if I mentioned a woman, it meant I was attracted to her. To some extent, that was true, but I couldn't find the energy to start dating again. I felt like I was too old. When I mentioned this to Sherry, she started teasing me, calling me old man. The morning after Sherry's fall, as I was walking to the office, a newspaper headline caught my eye. It turned out that Copeland had been arrested the day before. I bought a copy and tried to read it on the fly as best I could. As is usually the case in court-ruled Britain, the accompanying article didn't say much, only that Copeland had been arrested and charged with conspiracy and perverting the course of justice. The article went on to list a whole bunch of other people from around the country who had also been arrested. One young woman was charged with perjury on multiple counts. 5 women, described as ex-spouses, were arrested and charged with conspiracy to obstruct justice. The newspaper article mentioned that several other ex-spouses had allegedly fled the country and extradition papers were being prepared at the time the article went to press. 7 other people were charged with various offenses, including conspiracy, aiding, and abetting. The article goes on to say that 12 ex-husbands are behind on their divorce payments. My understanding is that this means they will be retried after the above cases are finalized. I can't claim to have followed the developments, but the gist of it is that the same young woman has been featured in numerous divorce cases around the country, claiming to have had an affair with her husbands and, in one case, her wife. In each case, the reporter cited a story very similar to the one my mystery friend had told me all those months ago, and each case involved a rather large sum of money. Eventually, I saw my mysterious friend again. He was in the background of a television film. A reporter was standing on the steps of the High Court in London, announcing that Copeland and his conspirators had been found guilty on all counts. The next day, Sherry came again. This struck me as somewhat unusual because she usually came on Thursdays and today was Tuesday. Moreover, she looked into my department and waved a pair of theater tickets in front of my face. "What are your plans for this evening, Steve?" "Well, nothing much." "Okay, you can take me out to dinner and then I'll take you to the show." "You'll miss the train home," I remarked. "No, I won't miss it. There's one that leaves just after midnight. I'll catch it." After a few seconds, she added, "The last bus is leaving now, but Papa will pick me up from the station." The dinner was delicious and the performance was good. All in all, it was a lovely evening until we arrived at the train station. We looked at the departure board and it appeared that there would be no trains northbound until 5 in the morning. Sherry went over to the timetable and groaned. She was wrong. All previous trains had departed a few minutes after 1 o'clock in the morning. For some reason, however, the last one was leaving 10 minutes before 12. "Well, the hell with it," she said. "I'll have to stay." "I'll ring my old hotel and see if they have a room available," I suggested. "Don't be daft, Steve. I'll lie on your sofa and catch the early train in the morning." Yes, we argued about that. But I didn't see anything wrong with her staying in my flat if she wanted to, so we didn't make a fuss about it. No, we argued about which one of us would take the couch, and I tried to play the part of the gentleman. In the end, Sherry outweighed my arguments, saying she would rather sleep on the bench at the train station than force me out of my bed. Back at the flat, I found a spare sheet and decided to bed Sherry, using as a blanket my old sleeping bag that I kept in the car just in case. Don't forget that I had to dry it in the dryer for 20 minutes. It had been in the boot for a very long time. While the dryer worked its wonders, Sherry and I had tea and she took a close look at my flat. Sherry had looked into my flat a couple of times before when we took home frozen food and other things I bought to put in the freezer. While she showered, I made a damn uncomfortable, in my opinion, bed on the couch. It didn't take long for a heated argument about which of us would sleep on it before Sherry repeated her threat to go back to the station. After showering, we said goodnight to each other and I headed for my bedroom. I don't know what time it was when something woke me up. Yes, there was no doubt about it. Someone was blowing gently in my left ear. "Sherry?" I asked. Yes, Steve. Looks like you have the wrong bed, young lady." "Are you objecting, old man, or just stating a fact?" "Stating a fact, I suppose." "Good. But Sherry, Steve, if you say one word about the 12-year age difference between us, well, we'll start our married life off on the wrong foot, won't we?" "Married life?" "Yes, now come on. Show me what an old man can do." I wasn't surprised when Sherry didn't throw herself first onto the train. I'd already realized that she'd set me up quite effectively. As we walked to the office, Sherry explained that she was taking 4 days off to train new employees in the accounting department. In fact, she wouldn't be home until Sunday evening. And she also informed me that there was an opening at her company that could be filled almost permanently by someone who worked at mine. Not full-time, of course, just 3 days a week. And it would be a very flexible schedule. "No problems with taking the kids to school and things like that," Sherry added. "Kids," I sighed. "Of course, I want at least 2. And you'll be a great dad to Steve." "God, well, that's all right then." For one awful minute, I thought you were going to say 12. "See, that's what I like about you. You always see the bright side in everything." We were on our honeymoon. It was the time between sessions when you lay in each other's arms, too excited to sleep, but too tired to go back to. "Sherry," I asked, "how long were you going to be my wife?" "That's a good question, old man. You might say I saw a headline in the papers about your first wife and that Copeland bloke." "Oh, so soon?" "Yes." But if you want to accuse me of perfidy, you might even question my motives in inducing that fellow John to invite me to dinner that night at the very hotel I had chosen. I've had my eye on you for a long time. I'll have to keep an eye on you, won't I? Yes, old chap, but don't take me for Constance. I know what I want when I see it, and I'll never do anything that might mean risking losing it. Epilogue. Well, I've already mentioned that, in Malta, Sherry and I ran into a very surprised June, so I suppose I should tell you what she told me. June said that she thought there was an underlying submissiveness in Constance that Copeland had somehow recognized and picked up on. June noted that she had concluded from reading the newspapers that many of the women involved in his divorce proceedings seemed to be under some sort of male influence. I hadn't followed the details of the case, so this was news to me. June said they all seemed to want to take full responsibility for everything, even though Copeland was the only person involved in each case. I don't know what that man has in mind, but he can waste a few women, June told me. But Constance has turned against Copeland and sued him, hasn't she? Yeah, I remarked. Constance is my little sister, Steve. I've always taken care of her, and perhaps it's my fault. Perhaps the fact is that Constance has always obeyed my wishes. I pushed her into this ordeal. I don't think she would have had the courage to see it through if it hadn't been for me. Fortunately, Copeland relented and made an out-of-court agreement. I don't know how Constance would have behaved had they been in a courtroom. By the way, is this your new fiancé, Steve? Sure is. Sherry chased me down and caught me. She made a very good choice. June smiled back at me. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next videos.